It doesn't look like we have any public, so do we need to go through the introductions?
Nope, we're
Probably
okay.
not.
Logan is here. You can see his face
Hey,
online.
Logan.
Hey,
Yes,
Erica.
but I think Logan knows us all.
He does, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, approval of the March 10th agenda. May I have a motion unless there are any changes, corrections, deletions?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay. Right, all those in favor say aye or raise your hand. I say aye.
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 Okay, any opposed? Didn't think so. Okay, approval of the February 11th minutes. Any changes, corrections, deletions, etc.? If
I'll
not,
make a
may I have a
motion
motion to accept?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of February 11th, 2025 as presented.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Laura. All those in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, open to the public. Except for Logan, there is no public, so I'll close it. Executive Director's report, and we don't want to know about Bermuda.
I'll spare you the Bermuda deets. It'll
No,
be a
it's
short
crazy.
one because I really want to preserve the time for Logan and more importantly, get you all out early because you all have spent so much time here over the last few months. The big things to note after a brief hiatus because of my not slacking, but over scheduling. Our newsletter is back in circulation. Hopefully you guys saw that all. So
Yep.
that will encompass pretty much everything that I want to talk about today. The big notes are this future land use map, which Logan's going to be talking about today. And we will be starting our municipal meetings at the end of March, April timeline. We're waiting for folks to reorganize as select boards before asking for meetings. The next one is select board meetups, backed by popular demand. We're going to be hosting our next one in mid-April. I am just waiting for confirmation from Castleton. They're going to be our host town, but I'll be sending out news on that very soon. We had about 14 towns present and 20 participants. We're going to hopefully eclipse that number at the next one. So lots of good stuff happening at the RPC. Any questions? Anything on the newsletter that piqued your interest or upcoming events, opportunities? Municipal planning grants are due at the end of this month. Otherwise, it's business as usual. We have a lot of stuff going on.
Okay. No discussion? Then the regional plan update?
Yes. So staff are working on their second revision of task 3. We actually met as a team today and had a really great exercise going over our chapter summaries. So we noticed that more needed to be done to sort of strongly encourage collaboration between the staff. So we decided to include more staff in the sort of process. That's why we're doing these summary sort of roundtables together. In addition, we've talked a lot about how next revision, there's only a week of time. So instead of getting you all together during that week, we're going to share with you the copies, but we are actually going to review every single chapter entirely as a staff. So we have blocked out the entire week of the 24th, and we're going to meet 2 hours a day to go over each chapter. So the entire staff will have read the entire plan.
Oh, yeah.
And
Wow.
I feel like this is going to be, it's a huge effort.
I was gonna say big endeavor.
Big endeavor, but I think this would really get us over the hump over sort of getting outside of our own heads and outside of our own chapters. So you are off the hook. We'll obviously share those drafts with you so you can see them. But we really anticipate the next big one being task 3, Rev 3. So that is really the only update I have. We're still continuing to work on phase 3 engagement, what that looks like. But right now, other than drafting, the main focus is this future land use map, which is why I wanted Logan in here early to see you guys and show you all the work that he's done up to this point and what we have planned for the towns moving forward.
Okay,
That's all I have, Erica.
thank you. All right, so I guess Logan's on tap now.
Can I clarify, I would just, one thing
Sure.
that I've just mixed up probably. So you're gonna do that all staff thing in whatever weeks you said.
So week of
So-
the 24th.
So, and then you said that there's a Rev 3,
Three.
task 3, is that after that?
That's
Is
after
there-
that.
Okay, and
then
there
there's-
is another review that you want us to. be
It's another
engaged
short
in?
one. It's another week. So it'll likely be another sort of remote review like we're proposing for the 24th. So these next
Okay.
few revisions are really short.
Okay,
So we'll talk at
we're
a,
not doing like the big
Nope,
reviews that we did
we're done
before,
with
we're done
those.
with
Yeah, we
Okay.
just don't have the time. So congrats.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
okay, that's
Yeah.
good. I'm happy to participate and review, but yeah.
please. Yeah,
not
we
have
still
those
want
big
that,
ones.
especially since you've been,
I think that
yeah.
doing it, you don't have time for another one of those?
No,
You've got
yeah.
the energy
And we
for one
still
of
have
those.
task 4. So there's 2 more revisions in task 4. So yeah. Oh, you'll see the plan.
Yeah,
We
but-
just won't ask you to be here all day.
I
So
think you can beat something to death too, because every time you review it,
well,
if you're asked to review something, the expectation is to comment.
yeah. Even if
So
you have
you're
nothing.
looking,
Right.
Yeah.
you know, and maybe
I know
we
what
get a
you mean,
little
Leo.
too picky.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Leona.
Yeah.
This is the time for refinement, not major review. I think we're sort of looking for this or this moving
Yeah.
forward, you know?
Exactly.
So we'll talk more in detail. We've got meetings in between that we'll be catching up on. You know, it'll be after our April meeting, so we'll have opportunities. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Okay, now it's time for Logan.
Great, yeah. Yeah, so we're gonna be talking about the future land use map. Really the kind of goal is sort of the background of this map, the benefits it brings, and then also reacting throughout the process to the actual map itself. The regional, the future land use map is the core of the regional plan. We've had future land use maps before. This is the first future land use map I could find in our records. Maybe might be one now. Is that
No,
the earliest?
this would be the
Yeah.
earliest, yeah.
Yeah,
So we
so-
were formed in 68, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. So this is just to say we've had a future land use map for over a half century. This is the one that's currently in effect. And what's kind of different from the history of our having over a half century of future land use maps is that we've, as an organization, got to choose the different types of future land use areas. So we've had different terminology. We've defined them differently over the years. What's different in this iteration is that changes in state law are requiring us to use specific future land use areas that are determined in statute. I actually have a written copy of the language, but it is to say that it's pages of, it's not a couple paragraphs as the section used to be. So there's a lot more requirements and it's a lot more rigid of what the map looks like. The purpose, so there was a change in state law that resulted in this sort of change. So the purpose of this change is going back to Vermont's land use planning goal that has been around since the late 60s of maintaining Vermont's historic settlement patterns of compact villages and urban centers separated by rural countrysides. Colloquially can be referred to as smart growth. But really, this is to just set the stage that this is the intent of this this standardization of the mapping in these specific categories. It's all to align with this goal. This is a kind of conceptual way to think about the categories. So there's sort of a conceptual idea of what each category means, like with a photo. And then you'll see that there was an order by which areas were mapped and kind of a hierarchy. So there are situations where specific land use areas could have been categorized in more than one way. So in the event where that happened, this is how the kind of hierarchy works. So we kind of started in the villages, looking at our downtowns and village centers, and these planned growth areas or village areas, which sort of surround the villages. And it kind of works its way out from those villages. And you'll see this as I go through the presentation, but it is to say that they were literally mapped that way. And so we're going to start with downtowns and village centers, which were mapped first. And stop me at all if this starts to get confusing, because I can understand that it might. So the downtowns and village centers are the traditional or historic mixed use and business and civic centers. They're mapped on the right side of the screen. If a municipality has a state designated village center or downtown, that area is included in this district. And then also, just more broadly, this area is eligible for the new state designation program. So they've tweaked the state designation program under a new framework. A lot of the benefits are the same, but the process for eligibility has changed. This also is two separate categories or future land use areas, downtown center versus village center. The difference between the two is that a village center is that you got it.
Yeah.
Okay. A village center is that you're not required to have a public water system, wastewater, zoning, or subdivision bylaws. If you're going to be a downtown, you have to have all four of those pieces. And so that's the only distinction between those two areas. There's kind of two things to consider so there are some towns that have existing designated areas. So Mendon is an example of this. And so each existing designated area was reviewed to see if it could be expanded based off changes in statute. So essentially, statute was changed slightly, which allows us to expand the boundaries for areas eligible, but that expansion has to be to abutting commercial or civic areas or to the state historic district's boundaries. So these are three examples of existing designations that were expanded to varying degrees. So the silver or white line is the current designation, and the shaded area is the expansion. And so they're expanded for different reasons. So like Middletown Springs, for instance, was expanded to state historic district boundaries. Mendon was expanded to abutting commercial areas. And Brandon was also expanded to an abutting commercial area as well. And so this is to say that we were looking at at potential to expand, essentially. That's one option. Another option, or another way that these areas were created, is adding new designations to areas that currently aren't designated. So this is a list of new centers. So one example is Danby Four Corners, which currently is not enrolled in the designation program. And as I was reviewing every town was considered for the possibility of getting a new center or expanding existing designations. And I would look at, the existing characteristics. I'd look at the town plan, and I'd look at historic architecture of Rutland County, which conveys the history and the specific history of specific buildings in specific areas of town. And so these are the different centers that were new. And so when you go and compare the current designation program as the current village centers and current downtowns versus changes that would be made through this map, there would be an additional 1,250 buildings that would be enrolled in these centers that would be eligible for financial benefits, essentially. And on a town by town level, it's 26 out of 27 towns versus currently is only 21 out of 27 towns. And so yeah, this is one piece, but in total there shows what is
Sorry
that,
about
39.
Hubbardton's the only one without
Yeah.
Guessing that, and I'm
Yeah.
looking at
you
it.
don't have any sort of center area, with mixed
Yeah.
use.
If you're driving up Route 30, you blink in a certain spot. You miss it.
Yeah, that's right.
And I did look at Hortonia as a historic, like there's history there, but
Yep, there's history there, but-
yeah, it doesn't, yeah,
And we lost our store that we had up
Right.
there almost 2 years ago.
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it is to say that more buildings, as we compare to the current village centers and current downtowns, there'd be new centers and expansions to existing designations that results in additional 1,250 buildings in these two types of areas. I'll give a pause if anyone has any questions relating to village center and downtown, because I'm about to move on to the next area, which is the planned growth area and village area. So I'll keep moving on unless there's any
I'll
questions.
just ask, and I think I've chatted with you before,
Mhm.
what about village centers that a town like ours might challenge and say, we shouldn't designate that a village
Mhm.
because blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Flood area, it's all in the flood area.
Right.
for us,
Yeah, I think the piece about that is that it's making for benefit, like financial benefits that allow landowners, like all it is an eligibility. So you're eligible for benefits. Whether the landowner wants to use those benefits or not is up to the landowner. But I think you make a good point that, yeah.
And likewise, same thing, I think we were chatting, is if our town would like to suggest another area that could be considered,
Right.
it might not fall into, we were talking
Yeah.
about it, enough categorization.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
things that, but there might be things there that you haven't recognized that we could provide that, might allow it to be designated.
Yeah.
It's possible, unlikely though. I mean, generally because
Yeah.
we have looked at all the future land use maps and all the town plans in every town, and we've tried to cover everything that we could within realistic expectations of the statute. Now, we'd be willing to hear out any
Yeah.
town on like,
Right.
hey, we think this would be a better spot.
Right.
But we went so far the other direction of like everyone that possibly could be, even Danby Four Corners, which has like 6 buildings, it's like, we stretched it pretty far.
Yeah, and you'll actually see there's a few slides from now, you'll kind of, I think that point is also conveyed, but I think it is to say that, talking to towns, I think those are the sorts of things we want to hear, and, yeah, so, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this is a draft and state law is specific, but it is to say that, we're, if we can,
Flexibility.
yeah, right, exactly.
I'm not familiar with the stick, so enough to, okay, keep going.
Yeah, so the next two are planned growth areas and village areas. I'm about to go into planned growth areas. I want to acknowledge that the text you're seeing on the screen is summarizing about a page and a quarter worth of requirements. So this is like what I think is the simplest way to explain this, but there's a few little caveats that might be oversimplified. But I have the exact language right next to me. The planned growth areas are the future highest density areas in the region. And currently they have a form of mixed use development. So there's, a mix of commercial, residential, et cetera. The area is served by water and or sewer systems. And when I'm talking about water and or sewer systems, we're including small community systems in this conversation. A municipality, in order to qualify, has to have both zoning and subdivision regulations. And it is to say that when I talk about towns having both zoning and subdivision regulations, there are some towns that currently do not have both that are working to obtain having both for this, for Act 250 related purposes, which includes this. So there are like 3 or 4 towns that are in that bucket. So I just wanted to make that caveat as well. Statute says that the area has to be generally walkable. All the regional planning commissions have kind of agreed on what is generally walkable means that 70% of buildings within this area are within 0.25 miles of a sidewalk. And that's how it was determined to be generally walkable. So not every single area is going to have a sidewalk right next to it, but for the most part, the area you can get near a sidewalk and connect to the sidewalk network. In terms of flood concerns, this area does not have flood hazards mapped by the federal government, special flood hazard areas, and river corridors, which are mapped by the state of Vermont. Those areas are not included unless there's a very specific definition, but basically what that definition means is that these areas should be included if that area is fully surrounded by an urban context. So that basically, if there's an area and there's buildings or roads, or it's really buildings that are fully surrounding it, then it is in an urban context where then it would be included. That was decided by statute. Also, in order to get to a planned growth area, the municipality wants to have, has to show we want high density growth and that they allow for it. So I had to go and look at the municipal plan and look at, what is the municipal plan's future land use map intending for this area? Is it intending it to be high density? And I think I did this for all the towns. I also wanted to go and look at the zoning directly and see what is the allowable, because all the towns have zoning. What is the allowable density? Is there a high density? Because sometimes municipal plans can be fairly vague and the zoning can provide more specificity of, how much density. The piece that might be a little bit confusing also is that the planned growth area, and this is where I'll point to the next slide, the planned growth area actually encompasses the underlying downtown or village center. So for example, you'll see that Rutland City is probably the clearest one, where there's a darker color and then there's a brighter color around it. The darker color is the downtown and the brighter color around it is the planned growth area. But actually that entire blob is considered the planned growth area, which I understand can be kind of confusing. But I just wanted to point that out, that, the entire area. So all of these areas combined represent the planned growth area, but they include the underlying downtown or the underlying village center. I'm going to move on to village areas. The village area is an area surrounding the village or the downtown, similar to the planned growth area. The requirements for the village areas aren't as many, I guess you could say. There's still some. This is a very tricky provision, so I want to make sure I say it correctly. The municipality has to have water and or sewer system within the municipality, but the village area itself does not have to have water and or sewer. So the municipality does, but the actual area itself doesn't. So I understand that's a little tricky. I had to read it 8 times before I really got it. But the area itself has to have adequate soils for a septic system. And so adequate soils for a septic system, all the regional planning commissions have agreed, is class 1 to class 3 septic suitability rating, which is determined by the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. It all is to say that I had to go and look and make sure that the actual boundaries of this area itself excludes areas that you could not put a septic system in. It is to say that the entire area you could put a septic system in. We actually have to go and make sure that is as such. as determined by this mapping. The municipality, just like with the planned growth areas, has to have both zoning and subdivision regulations, and the caveat I made before still applies. And then in terms of flood hazards, the idea of being surrounded by an urban context, being surrounded by urban development or infrastructure, that idea is still applies to village areas, but there's an additional caveat where if a municipality has basically adequate regulations for those areas, that the village area also would exclude the flood hazards. So basically, if a town has regulations pertaining to special flood hazard areas, and it has regulations pertaining to river corridor areas, and both those areas meet the state standards, then the flood concern is excluded for that area because the municipality has local regulations that would address those concerns. Similarly, also to the planned growth area, we have to look at the municipal plan and the zoning to indicate that there's opportunities for new development. This language is a little bit broader, but essentially that there's actually some opportunity for new development, as this area also relates to areas for growth and things like that. And then as well, just like with the planned growth area, it's the underlying village center and downtown and planned growth areas. So all of this area combined on the map is the village area. And so as you can see, that we're starting to build out pieces from these centers. And so these 4 pieces combined. So right, we just walked through downtowns, village area, downtowns, village centers, planned growth areas, and village areas. All 4 of those areas collectively are the areas that are eligible for state designation benefits. And if you do the math, the net result would be about an additional about 13,000 buildings that would have access to these financial benefits, which are things like tax credits and different. If you're in a downtown or a village center, the benefits are slightly different than if you're in a village area or a planned growth area. So that is to say that the benefits are slightly different depending on the area, but it is to say that it's financial benefits to, actually there's the statistic right there, 38.5% of the region's buildings in total. So 17,000 buildings in total would have access to these benefits, or an additional 13,000 buildings. And so that is to say about the state designation program. Also, these same 4 areas sort of, kind of relate to Act 250 exemptions, but the big caveat is that one, certain smaller village centers are not going to be eligible for benefits, and 2 is that any area that could be eligible, the municipality has to opt in. So the municipality has to, like in a formal process, opt into the benefits. If a municipality is eligible and if they choose to opt into the benefits, they would either fall into 2 tiers. And I'm not going to get too much into the weeds, but basically one of these tiers is for a full Act 250 exemption. And the bar for that is pretty high. And then there's also another bucket where you get a partial exemption of housing projects of up to 50 units. And there's also a bar that the municipality has to demonstrate. I also just want to point out that this graphic is trying to show that there is a connection between the land use categories, the designation program, and Act 250. So all this is sort of tied together. The current designation program doesn't do this explicitly. So this is sort of one of the transitions that happened with Act 181. Also, this is the slide I was kind of previewing before, but so we're talking about benefits, right? How these areas have specific benefits. The intent of mapping all of this was to be consistent with state law. This needs to be approved by a state board, and our plan needs to be, approved. But we also want to maximize areas for eligibility for these benefits, in acknowledgement that there are real financial and regulatory implications associated with, being mapped on one side of the line or the other, that sort of thing. is a real implication that was fully acknowledged as I was mapping through the whole process. The remaining,
Before you go
Yeah,
on, can you
yeah.
go back to the map?
yeah,
So I just want to talk to you briefly. We have been working, like Logan said, with towns that are missing a component to unlock the full tier 1 exemption, either 1A or 1B. So most of the towns were just missing subdivision regulations, others were missing other components. However, we knew pretty early on, based not only on our work with the towns, but actually our current future land use map, because they actually dovetail pretty similarly as to which towns are going to qualify. So if we look up here for the tier 1A, the sure bet for us is Rutland City, because not only do you have to have water, sewer, zoning, subdivision, all that stuff, you really have to demonstrate that you have capacity to take on Act 250 applications, because not only will they be fully exempt, but they actually have to take over open Act 250 applications that are pre-existing, that haven't been closed. So we don't know what level of demonstration of capacity they're gonna have, because theoretically, beyond Rutland City, Brandon, Fairhaven, Poultney, Killington, West Rutland could maybe be tier 1A towns. The capacity issue is a concern because none of them have full-time zoning administrators, right? Could they ramp up and potentially do that? Maybe they could increase fees and pay for that position. Some are shared, like Jeff is in many of those towns. So the 1Bs, we also have a pretty good handle on. The towns outside of Rutland City could be 1Bs as well. But also in addition to those towns, Castleton, Fairhaven, Poultney, Killington, Brandon, West Rutland, Proctor, and Wallingford. Am I missing any? No, that's it. Could also be in that tier 1B category. So, we're going to be coming to towns and with eyes wide open and say, hey, we don't know yet what the threshold is on capacity for applying, but in the meantime, they should definitely at least opt into the 1B areas. So out of the 27 towns, there may be what, 10 to
Hadn't thought
12
about
at
that,
the
yeah.
most that would qualify for tier 1. So we do want to manage expectations that, like, yes, this unlocks opportunities. The financial benefits of the designations are not the biggest benefit. Act 250 is the biggest benefit here. So we don't want to go into Hubbardton or Shrewsbury or, Pollitt and say, well, Pollitt's on the edge actually, but let's say, Timoth and say, hey, you guys could be Act 250 exempt. It's not going to happen. The statute just doesn't allow for it. And frankly, those are areas that can handle significant growth. They don't have water and sewer, they don't have the development patterns. So that's going to be a really important thing for us when we do our town meetings, is to customize this presentation and our work with them, the town, to sort of say, hey, you are in this category of tier 1. Where do you see yourself? Where do you want to be? Do you want to be 1A? Do you want to be 1B? Do you not want to be it at all? Hopefully everyone will say, yes, of course we want to be it, because we want tax revenue and housing growth. But know that we've put a lot of work into this, and I went and met with most of the towns that were missing this component almost a year ago. No, about 9 months ago, and said, hey, start working on this if you want to be eligible. So needless to say, we have a really strong idea of who is going to be in this category and who is not.
So just to, I understand, they're exempt from Act 250, but they essentially have to perform all of the requirements.
It's
or
called being
the
functionally
zoning
equivalent. Yeah.
administration
So
themselves
it would be,
to
it will be,
the developments.
yeah, it will be like your own zoning department would anyways. So like in Rutland City, let's say, there's a project that would be normally under Act 250. They would just take over the zoning application and building application like they would normally. So it really wouldn't be any different for them. The biggest question is, will this new exemption drive development? And will we see not only like 1 or 2 major applications a year, but like dozens? That'll be the question.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Thank you, Logan.
That was very helpful. Yeah, so we're now gonna walk through the areas that don't have these specific benefits associated with them as a result of Act 181. And so we're gonna start with, there's 3 other types of growth-related future land use areas. The first one is transition or infill. These areas are served by a public water or wastewater system, but for one reason or another didn't meet the requirements to be, it didn't meet the requirements to be, the 4 we just walked through, with one caveat to that, which is there's one, the airport industrial park actually technically doesn't fit that bucket because it fits another area. But it is to say basically that these are really the remainder of areas that are served by water or wastewater. And I'll just quickly kind of show there's only a couple of these areas in the region that met the requirements. 4 of them are in Rutland Town. Oh, they're in orange. I should have said that. And so you'll see 4 of them are in Rutland Town, kind of north, south, east, and west. There's one in Mendon on Route 4, which is actually a portion of their commercial zoning district, if you're familiar with Mendon's zoning map, which I guess only Larry would be. And then there's also a portion in Pittsford and a portion in Brandon. And then the enterprise areas are our, business focused areas. So industrial parks, an area of natural resource extraction, like a quarry, other commercial land uses that involve large land areas, or
Airport.
yeah, that's a perfect one. The airport, or an area that has high economic activity. That's not necessarily, it's really just another area of high economic activity. Those are in pink. So the airport is one. Amia is another one. You can see, the Slate Valley. You can see some quarries, and other similar uses. The resource-based recreation growth area is not the best named area, in my opinion, in the sense that it, I think, gives off the sense that we're trying to map every recreational resource in the region, which is not the intent of the future land use area. It's really these large scale resource-based recreation facilities that has, infrastructure, jobs, and housing. So there's only a couple that kind of fit that. It's in Lake Bomoseen, Lake St. Catherine, Killington at the ski resort, and then you'll see a little bit of Okemo that stretches into Mount Holly. I like to point out, like, Chittenden Reservoir is a great example of a important recreational resource, and the reason why it didn't really fit resource-based recreation is like the type of future land use activities you'd want to see in Chittenden Reservoir versus Lake Bomoseen or Lake St. Catherine. It's just not the type of development or land use context that is, versus Lake St. Catherine or Lake Bomoseen. So I just wanted to kind of, I like that as an example of kind of getting an understanding of resource-based recreation. So if you put all the pieces we just put together, these are the growth areas, as well as I added water. So there's little ponds and things like that as well. But it's hard not to put water in when we're talking about Lake Bomoseen and Lake St. Catherine. So this is to say, these are the growth areas. Everything that is not that is white is rural related. And so that's this next grouping. And really the rural areas there's a hierarchy to the rural areas as well, where rural agriculture and forestry. So basically, when I looked at these white areas that's remaining, I went to the current use program, and looking at parcels that are currently enrolled in the current use program. And this, for the record, is a methodology that the regional planning commissions have for agriculture and forestry. And so basically the methodology is look at the current use parcels, and then 20 plus acre blocks. So we're not looking at like tiny little parcels here and there, but bigger blocks, and making sure that there's trees and or agricultural land cover. And UVM does a great job of mapping land cover on like a hyper specific. So you can really see, is the current use parcel covered with trees? I mean, we could do this for every single parcel and, manually check, but UVM allows you to kind of do it all in one big swoop. But yeah, check, is there trees or is there, agricultural land cover? And I also just want to point out that the rural agriculture and forestry area is, the intent of that area is to be, here are the areas we're giving the highest support for agriculture and forestry. But it is to say that development is allowed, provided, and this is where I'm quoting the law, it is carefully managed to promote the working landscape and rural economy while protecting the agricultural and forest resource value. So development in this area is allowed, but it's also needs to protect future agricultural and forestry uses in that design of the development. Rural conservation, if you're not in the current use program and meet those caveats I just outlined with agriculture and forestry, then consideration for rural conservation. The areas that are kind of reviewed is there's a conservation planning data set that I looked at that basically maps all parcels that have different protection mechanisms on them. So conservation easements, for example, or Green Mountain National Forest. So areas like that are one data set that was looked at. Another is wetlands. So a class 1 or class 2 wetland that is 5 acres or larger. So not every single little wetland is captured in this, but it's the bigger wetland blocks is the idea. And then there's also the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources maps highest priority interior forests and highest priority connectivity blocks as important areas to protect. And those areas are also included if they're not shown up already in the agriculture and forestry area. And then one other piece is that if a town, and I understand that there's a lot of pieces going on in this conservation area. If a town, this goes back to a point I'd made earlier, where if a town does not regulate special flood hazard areas and river corridors, then those areas are mapped as rural conservation. But if the town does already locally regulate those areas, they're not designated as rural conservation. And these specific determinations were also something that all the regional planning commissions through this methodology came up with. If you're not agriculture and forestry and you're not conservation, then the remaining land area would be in this rural general, which again, I'm quoting statute, allows for low density residential and some limited commercial development that is compatible with productive lands and natural areas. And so this is saying, really it's our low density rural residential / agricultural land area. And I see those, when I look at town plan maps, I see that sort of rural residential / agricultural land use planning area. I've seen that as like a pretty common planning district. And then one other thing is that there's hamlets as well. And hamlets are just a point on the map. So they're not a specific district. So like the village center is like an actual district that's drawn out. A hamlet is just acknowledging small historic rural clusters, but it's not an actual district. And so this is the map, and I want to kind of caveat that to me, when I look at this map, I think that there's like a lot going on. And it's like, okay, what's the takeaway of this map? And there's reasons why that is, and I think it's partially has to do with some of these agriculture and forestry versus conservation versus general. There's a whole lot going on. Another way you can think about this map is how I've been describing it currently, which is growth areas versus rural areas. And so here's a different way to conceptualize the map. And it's that sort of growth versus rural. So the growth is the red, and really the goal is encouraging different forms of compatible growth. And the rural area is really maintaining that rural character. And really, to me, when I think of the rural areas, I think context is very key in these rural areas. And so that's where, planning for development around that context is what's important. And so this is just a way that you can think about the map. And I just think this is kind of a lot to digest. And I think at least this dichotomy helps you maybe slightly understand it better, or maybe not. I'd definitely be open to hearing about whether this is an effective way. But really the last slide is just the next steps from here, is that we're going to be kind of rolling out a similar but different presentation to municipalities with a this is clearly a regional lens. So kind of how does this map relate to the municipality and tailoring it to that. And also what Devin mentioned about the Act 250 tiers, where, certain towns, that conversation is going to be more or less important. So yeah.
One thing that's been sort of batted around, and I'm going to steal control from here just because I want to show you guys after this meeting. I'm going to share with you this map, which will be so much better for you to review. And that is we have an online map of this, so you can zoom in really far. Let it draw. It takes a minute.
Yeah, it'll take a good, it might take up to as you're seeing, like 30 to 45 seconds to maybe even a minute in the most extreme examples.
Okay, but you can see that definition that was lost. So if we go to, let's say West Rutland for Leona, it's probably not surprising. There's so many colors and so many things going on, but these really just follow where your dense development is in the village already, right? And I feel like a lot so far, a lot of folks around Act 181 have talked about winners and losers. And I think it's important to note that, tier 2, so anyone not in that tier 1A or tier 1B category are not necessarily losers. It's just business as usual.
Yeah.
There'll still be our 1 acre and 10 acre towns. They will fall in Act 250 or not. And when we talk about growth in rural, it's not to say there won't be housing growth in rural areas. There has to be. Our housing target is up to 15,000 units by 2050. Will we hit that? Probably not, right? But if we do, those all can't fit in these pink areas. They just can't. So we know that housing will be produced and constructed in our rural areas. But the big housing development, the big commercial development has to be where our resources are. So those are our pink and red areas. The one caveat to this whole thing is something that is yet to be established, which is tier 3. There's going to be an entire rulemaking process for areas with what they're determining critical natural resources that will have a stricter level of regulation. But I wouldn't worry. We don't know where these areas are yet, but most of the time, I'm guessing they're going to be areas you could never develop anywhere. Above 2,500 feet or 3,000 feet in class 1 wetland areas, the places where no one's building right now. So, we're not going to be responsible for that mapping. That'll be done by the Land Use Review Board and Agency of Natural Resources. So it's not gonna be reflected on this map. It's not part of what we're doing. And I really want to squash the sort of like fear out there that like this map is going to result in something being taken away. The goal of this map is to result in something being given with Act 250 and regulatory relief. And the way we have done it now is completely within statute and methodology, but stretched out the benefit about as far as it possibly could go with passing the straight face test. Because again, you guys remember, not only our plan has to be reviewed and approved by the Land Use Review Board, this map does. And I think they'll be deferential to the region because we know best, but we can't just say, yep, the whole region's a planned growth area because we want it to be. They'll be like, sorry, try again. So I will share this link with you. It is still very much draft. But take a look at your own town. Let us know what you think. It's a lot to digest, but at the same time, here's for you, Erica and Wallingford. Probably not a surprise here.
Not at
That's
all.
Temper, right? Or true temper. But we wanted to get this in front of you guys early so you could see it and understand what the process is going to be. And also, you know, when we ask select boards to schedule special select board meetings, the goal is to have the select board, the planning commission, and our regional commissioners at that meeting, which about 90%, 95% of you are on the planning commissioner select board, so that should be an easy meeting to get to. But do you guys have questions for Logan or myself about this? Is it making sense?
So,
There's a lot of components, right? But
yeah. So wait, when are you gonna release or send the link for the map?
I'll do it after this meeting,
Yeah.
just for you guys. And then we'll be talking about.
Should we, you're saying just for us guys, so, and you're gonna, like, I don't wanna share it with the select board, but should we share it with our planning commissions?
I would hold off until we get a chance to schedule these meetings. This is really for you on the executive committee, because we're not even gonna be bringing this to the full board until next month.
Okay.
Just because we have more refinement and work to do on the presentation and that whole thing.
And in high density areas for planned growth, I thought I remembered you saying that it would probably not be focused on single family, but multifamily and apartment buildings?
It would be any housing.
Any,
Yeah,
okay.
any housing. You're either gonna be in the 1A category where like any development is gonna be Act 250 free, or you're gonna be in that 1B where it's 50 units or less. So the less could be 1 unit, right?
Sure.
And again, that's gonna be business as usual. You'd go through the normal process you would for constructing a single family home that you would now, essentially. You wouldn't be under Act 250 unless there's something extreme, right?
Okay.
Yeah. There are caveats, right? And we won't get into every single one because like the road rule and there's all these things that like are little pieces that are in statute that won't be reflected on our map, but relate to Act 250. So yeah, and who knows? Statute changes, right? It sounds like there was interest in making technical corrections this session, and that sort of sounds like it's off the table. So, which is good. We want to just let us go in one direction without changing it and see how it goes. Then we can adjust,
Except for the Q3 they're gonna do.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you one thing. You were mentioning that you had to look at soils for septic.
yeah.
So you did that, you have the data.
Yep.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you're not showing that, it's part of the component.
Yeah, so essentially you can kind of think of the whole process like eligibility. So like I went through and I was like, okay, does it check off this box? Yes or no?
Yeah.
And then like walking through. So with that box, for example, I'd be like, that was village area. So I'll actually use Shrewsbury as Shrewsbury. Ooh, I shouldn't have said that, but I think it's North Shrewsbury that has a village area. So for example, I looked at, I know that you guys have a village-related zoning district that I think you might have like I remember there's a specific district.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a village residential.
Yep, that's exactly it. Right. So I looked at that district.
residential village.
Yep, I looked at that district. I looked at the zoning requirements associated with it.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this meets the housing, the development. Yeah. And so this is actually, thank you, Devin, for pulling this up. So you'll see there how there's like a little circle that's cut out there, like how there are little circles that are like, there's that one color of pink, and then there's like a yellow and a green.
Yeah.
Those little circles are examples of areas that do not have eligible soils. So that was like how it was filtered out. Is that
But like the little.
the little areas, because that's essentially the process itself
I'm
works.
surprised any of that does, frankly.
Right. Yeah. And the caveat is that when you actually look at the definition of class 1 versus class 2 versus class 3, is class 3 is like a marginal, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so it is to say that adequate soils is class 1, class 2, class 3. Class 1 is good to go. Class 2, I don't remember, but class 3, sorry, I don't remember it. Class 3 is like, it's questionable, like it's marginal. So it is to say that it's in this classification of adequate soils, but if you probably would need like an engineer to actually go out there and be like,
Right.
Yeah.
versus class 1 soils is like,
Aren't those the ones that are borderline stress test?
yeah, and I'd have to look at the actual definition, but I know class 4 soils is like, we've determined this is not adequate. Like it's definitely not adequate. And class 5 is like, we didn't look. And class 3, I think, is like, it's right on the edge. So those are lumped, that like all the RPCs decided that was counted as adequate, but it is to say that the amount of class 1 soils in our region versus class 2 and class 3, there's not a ton of class 1 soils.
Right.
So I wouldn't be surprised if we
For
actually
most of
looked at
Vermont.
that. Exactly. I wouldn't be surprised if we actually looked at that area in Shrewsbury and broke it down by the class types. And if it was a lot of class 3, if you're like, oh, there's any? So yeah, I think that's yeah.
I'm sort of asking because I already have one of my commissioners is like, oh, it was a rainy day. I was reading through 181 and like looking at the villages, and I guess I'll have to look at the soil types to like, why don't you just like hold on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like don't.
Yeah, the UVM mapping does not mean it perks, right? I mean,
Well, actually, that's from ANR, but yeah.
Right. Oh, sorry,
Really,
yeah.
You
Which
are
is
doing
from
this
US.
process,
Yes.
so
Right.
it doesn't make sense for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had to. Yeah.
It's still a broad overview. This is,
Yeah.
it gets as granular as it can, but yeah.
And Shrewsbury actually wasn't like, there are a few towns I could think of where you would really get the sense of like, oh, what was going on here? Because you get these interesting shapes, because there's just, wide swaths of areas that like you cannot put a septic system in. And so the shape of the village area, includes that aspect where it's like, oh, there's a huge hole in this area. What's going on? And you can't put a septic system here, but you can put it here or here or here.
Yeah.
So we tried to include any and all areas that checked off all the boxes. Yeah.
Okay,
Awesome,
Sounds-
thank you.
sounds like we all have a little bit of reading and research to do.
Indeed.
Okay, the March Board of Commissioner agendas?
Yep, so it's probably, thankfully for you all, it's a light agenda this month. I expected to be a short meeting. I feel like we've had some long ones recently, so no, we will not have community committee. We will have regional committee. There'll be several items, and actually the consultants from the Six Peaks Village in Killington will be joining us.
Okay.
Because they amended their regional or their Act 250 application, and they need us to comment on it. They made some changes to parking and stormwater. We had already reviewed and provided a letter of
Mhm.
no significant regional impact, but we've got to do that again. And then there will be a few section 248s, but unless you guys have anything that you want to add, this could be a nice light one, because I think April, May, June will be a little bit more dense.
Thank you, Logan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Logan.
Great.
Thank you.
One thing I did fail to mention, I completely forgot in the executive director's report, is that NATO study. So you remember in Act 181, the legislature mandated that RPCs hire a consultant to do a strategic assessment of all the regional planning commissions in Vermont. It's done. And boy, that was a lot of work. Even though I didn't write it, I had to help manage the consultants. We needed to get them to where we needed to be. So it's on our VAPTA website. I will send you the link when I send you the map link. You're more than welcome to read the 60 or 70 page report, but there's a nice, neat 10-page executive summary that gets to all the recommendations.
Mhm.
None of it should be super surprising. And again, it talks a lot about the VAPTA level, which is just one level above our RPCs, but I want you to take a look at it, and I would like to go over that a little bit at the March full board meeting. But I want to at least get that on your radar, so you know we actually completed it. You know, it was 2 months late, but it's done. The legislature didn't care. We needed the time. So I'll send that along as well.
Good. Okay, some light reading again.
Yay.
Right. Any commissioner updates? No? Then I guess we need a motion to adjourn.
Don't
I'll second that.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned at 11 minutes past 6 on today. Thank you,
All right.
everyone, for coming.
Take care, Laura and Larry, or Eric and Larry.
See you tomorrow, Larry.
Hey.
See ya.
No, Wednesday.
Larry, get better, stay better.
Okay, thank you.
Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.
Bye.